So these are all the components that I've taken out of the box. Here's the manual. Start with the manual, parking heater, installation instructions and manual. It's actually pretty good. Some people complain about their manuals being epic levels of Chinglish, Chinese and English combined, making it unreadable, but this is actually pretty good. So, manual. Also with this option comes the remote control, wireless remote control. There are various different options of LCD panel and wireless remote control, and this is wireless, not infrared, so that will go through walls if you want to mount it outside. We have the air intake. This is for the combustion air, for the diesel combustion furnace, and here is the hose for the air inlet, combustion air inlet. This will expand, I don't know, about twice the size, but it seems like a short length, but it will expand. Here's the air outlet hose. This is 75 millimeters. That's the air duct going out with hot air. This is 24 millimeters or 25 millimeters, depending on which part of the instructions you read. Here's the exhaust pipe. Not very long, but again, this is flexible. We'll see by how much in the installation. And then we have Jubilee clips, hose clips. Looks like you got some 24, 25 mil ones there, 3, and then there's 2 75 millimeter hose clips there as well. Couple of mounting brackets. And here is the muffler, along with a bracket to mount the muffler. Is that 2 brackets in there or 1? I think it's 1. 1 bracket in there, 90-degree mount for the muffler. And that is that. So we'll get the rest of the packaging off the main unit and we'll take a look at that. Here she is then, the diesel heater, Vevor, car parking heater, diesel, 12 volts, 40 watts, 8 kilowatts. So this is the air intake on the back. There is a power cable here for 12 volts. I've already tinned up the ends just so we can use it temporarily. We've got handles on the top. Here's the fuel cap, diesel tank, filler up. I've just got her on a lazy Susan here to make it easy to spin around. So this is the main display panel. We'll get her fired up in a second. And this is the air outlet. So this is where the hot air comes out of. And then we have these mounting plates down the bottom. Now they're actually quite sharp. All of this metal here is really sharp. So we're going to address that as well today. But yeah, I'm actually quite surprised. It's not as big as I thought it was going to be. We're talking about 37 centimeters, about 14.5 inches. Talking about 42 centimeters, about 16.5 centimeters there to the top of the main casing. To about 37 centimeters, about 14.5 inches. Probably about 16 inches to the top of the handle if you're in a tight squeeze. And in terms of the width of the unit, talking about 15 centimeters, including these buckles on the side here. You're probably going to want to allow a little bit more. So in terms of maximum width, it's going to take up, is going to be about 20 centimeters, 7.5 inches would give you enough clearance on these side buckles that keep the canopy down. And then that's really it from the outside. Like I say, you've got the main control panel, the air outlet that's already hot coming out, and then you've got the air inlet here, and then a power cable. That is literally it. Underneath though is where the main hose is and the exhaust goes. I'm going to take this cover off and we'll have a look inside and we'll see what's going on. So let's get her undressed and see how she looks. First things first, we need to remove the cap. Then we need to get these buckles and you just release them from the top. Okay, so here we go then. There's the main heater unit at the bottom, and then there's the fuel tank at the top. As I said, this is 5 litres. And then there's a fuel pump here, fuel dosing pump. So rather than being a constant stream of diesel, it will be a it's like a pulse. Let's spin her around. I'll tell you one thing we're going to need to do is to raise these feet up, to raise the platform up a bit on some blocks of wood. So I'm going to cut those up. I'm looking at rerouting this tubing, yeah, and a few other modifications. So I've already removed this, and I'm not going to put it back on because this was actually quite a tight bend on the fuel tubing here for the pump. You can see here the way the angle. So I'm going to actually move this pump. You can see there's a few different hole options. So I'm going to move this pump over to that hole, and then I should have a little bit more room. Let's take this out, look. So you can see here's the dosing pump. There's not much room to get an angle in there without it crimping. So by having it moved over slightly, and there is a very specific angle that the dosing pump needs to be actually mounted at. You don't want it to be horizontal because you need the air bubbles to be able to go up. So yeah, that's the idea of that. And there's not really much else to it. I mean, this shelf here just lifts up. And one thing I noticed as well is that it's still actually got the plastic covering on it from the manufacturers. So if that gets warm, that's probably going to get smelly. Here we go, look. You can see there's just a flange here, and that just slots in. You can see here, I've already removed the bolts from underneath so that we should be able to lift this out if we're careful. In fact, what we'll do is we're going to disconnect these cables first. This is the main cable for the heater. So let's disconnect that. Press here. This is the diesel heater completely removed from the case then. So in order to get inside, we need to remove this top plate, and you just unscrew the air intake, and you can just essentially lift it up and pull it out, and it will reveal the internal gubbins. So this is the fan of the intake, and the air is drawn in and across the heatsink here for the main diesel furnace. So this is where the business happens. And then you have the air intake goes in here and the fuel in here, and then the exhaust comes out here. And then you can see here, this is what they call the control board, motherboard under there with the components inside. And I noticed here the way the cable comes in this grommet, there's no cable relief or anything to stop it pulling out, look. So I might put a cable tie on the inside of there before I close it up, just to keep that cable from pulling through the grommet on the side. The other thing as well, you can remove the entire thing from the plastic case just by lifting it out, but you'll need to remove the fuel hose and the rubber grommet and everything else before you can do that. So bear that in mind. Also, my fan, when I first started it up, had a rubbing sound. Here we go. Can you hear? It's quite a lot. Yeah. And I saw some people suggest, other people had there's one or two I've seen that have had a rubbing fan. When it starts up, it sort of rubs on the side. People had suggested using a screwdriver and getting in between here and pushing the fan out. I definitely don't advise that. What you'll find is in the underside of the fan here, there was a bunch of plastic just sticking out, just from the moulding, just plastic from the moulding. But you'll see there's a magnet here, and that's part of the Hall effect sensor, which detects the rotation, the RPM, the speed of the fan. So if you move this fan out too much, you could affect the distance between the Hall effect sensor and the magnets. But I just found a little scalpel in there. This here is what was actually cut off the inside of that fan with a scalpel. Nothing major, just a bit of a plastic molding, and now it's completely silent. So I haven't had to, shift this up the shaft or anything like that, or move it. Just remove a little bit of plastic molding and it was fine. So just in case yours is rubbing, that's what it was. I'll flip it round this way, and you can see here, this is the coil. So this is where the wires go into the coil, which heats up and preheats the diesel. The coil is initiated on when you first start the system. It will bring the diesel up to temperature, to burning temperature, and then it will turn off. And then on the cool down process, when you actually turn it off, it will keep the fan running to cool the fins down, so it doesn't leave it in a boiling hot state. And it will also fire up the coil in order to burn off any excess fuel that's inside the furnace. So it should leave itself clean inside each time you start it up and turn it off. So don't ever remove the power to turn it off. It needs to go through a cool down process to burn off the excess fuel with the coil and to blow the hot air through, the cool air through, and cool down the heatsink furnace once it's finished. What I'll do now is I'm going to remove this back part here, which is where the hot air blows out. I'm just going to use a small screwdriver, something like this, and then you push these little divots down. Like that. There we go. And then you can just pop that off. Like that. And this is how she looks. So that's where the air's going to come out. You can see there's some thermal pads in here, just to get as a spacer away from the casing. But there really isn't too much to it, which is what makes them so reliable. There's not much to go wrong. One thing I might do, I've just noticed here, on the inside, this is on the outlet, yeah? So you're going to have air rushing around the outside and then funneled in and out through the hot air outlet, yeah? But you see here, we've got these long extruded bits of plastic sticking out here. And if we're really unlucky, that could cause a whistling sound. So I might just go around there with a sort of like a 300 grit sandpaper or something and just take those high points off. Some of them are quite sticking out quite high, plastic moulding. And this is a similar thing to what was on the inside of the fan that caused the rubbing noise. So yeah, they could do with cleaning up their moulds a little bit. So I'm going to do that for them, and I'm just going to get some sandpaper and take these high points out of the outlet funnel. It's working quite well already. This is probably about 500, 400. Here I've finished sanding down the little moulding bits inside, which should increase the airflow even more, less turbulence, less noise. Only took about 30 seconds with a bit of, you know, reasonably chunky sandpaper. Job done. So the air outlet funnel I've put back on the end there, and so that's nice and secure. And before I put the top and put it all back together again and put it back in the chassis, I just want to address this cable, this loose cable here, just because I don't really want anything pulling on this motherboard here. Could cause a problem. So I think we'll just throw a tie wrap on there quickly before we close it back up. And I think what we'll do is we'll go about here, just a not too chunky tie wrap, but good enough to give it a bit of tension before it pulls it right out. I'm just going to cut that off flush, point that downwards, keep it out of the way of everything. Perfect, there we go. And we'll pop it all back together and we'll get it in the case. All back together, that's nice and solid now. We know that the air outlet's going to be nice and clean. We've removed the plastic from the fan just to stop it rubbing, making a noise. So we should be ready to go on to the next phase.